Well, week 2 of fantasy football was absolute chaos. A lot more points than we saw in week 1, but still the same chaotic nature of week 1. Let's talk about players that it might be time to panic on. We're going to give you a panic level from 1 to 10 and talk about how week 2 impacts fantasy football. Now, first name we need to talk about, because this is going to impact so many people in fantasy football. That is Joe Burrow and his injury. So he comes out there, 7 points in fantasy football, 1 touchdown. He looked fine. The offense was a little bit stagnant against the Jags. But most importantly, he suffers a serious injury here in week number 2. And obviously we all saw it. It was right before the second half. He's kind of on the ground, limping off the field. It did not look like things were looking very good. Jeff Mueller said worst case scenario here would be mid-foot Liz Frank injury, but he's hoping that it's turf toe. And then just before we recorded this video, that we had confirmation that according to Fox 19 Jeremy, it is going to be a turf toe and he will miss several weeks. So I know this sounds really strange for me to say, but turf toe is probably the best case scenario for Joe Burrow with this injury. And you might be wondering why. Well, if that was a Liz Frank injury, that's probably Joe Burrow out for the entire season. So it is absolutely not worst case scenario for Joe Burrow, but it's definitely going to be one of those scenarios where you're not going to see him for multiple weeks. You're going to have to ask the question, when he's back, how healthy will he actually be? But this doesn't just impact Joe Burrow. You're not going to have Joe Burrow for a while. This impacts a lot of weapons in fantasy football. So it also impacts Jamar Chase, who comes out here in week number 2, has over 36.5 fantasy points, 14 catches, 165 yards, and a touchdown. But the issue is, teams weren't able to really game plan for a backup quarterback. So typically you see, wide receivers with their backups get a little bit more of those kind of free range plays because the defense hasn't game planned for the backup quarterback. They've game planned for the starter. No matter how you look at this, I know Jamar Chase was great this week. It was a Jags secondary. I want you to keep that in mind. No matter how you look at this is negative for Jamar Chase and for T. Higgins. If you look at the last 3 years, games with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase is averaging over 21 fantasy points per game, 91 receiving yards per game. But if you look at games without him, we have 6 games. He is averaging about 12 points per game. So yes, he does come out here in week number 2 and scores over 36 fantasy points, but you need to have lower expectations moving forward for as long as we're not going to have Joe Burrow. Jamar Chase is more of a top 12 to 15 wide receiver than he is a top 3 wide receiver. And that's painful to hear, but it's just the truth. So this is also going to impact T. Higgins, obviously. Now, T. Higgins, when you look at the in and the out splits, it's not as serious for like a Jamar Chase. In 36 games with Joe Burrow averaging almost 15 points per game, without him about 13.2 points per game. T. Higgins also had a fine day, but it was all based off that one busted play where he beat the DB down the field. It was a great play, and then the 2 DBs kind of run into each other, and he gets into the end zone. So 14.6 points, but it could have been even worse. In my opinion, this is I would say like a 6 out of 10 for T. Higgins, 6 out of 10 for Jamar Chase as far as the panic level goes. I'm not going to sit here and tell you to, hey, panic, trade them away, get them off your team, because when Joe Burrow is back, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are still going to be incredible plays each and every week. But unfortunately, the Joe Burrow injury, it impacts him if you have him at quarterback. It impacts the upside of a Jamar Chase, the upside of a T. Higgins, and it also impacts Chase Brown, who has been getting a lot of volume, but this offense has not been able to establish the run game. They've had to go through the air. The offensive line is not very beefed up, and it's not been an efficient run game. I don't think without Joe Burrow with that deep threat, just knowing the best quarterback in the NFL is behind center, without that, I don't think we're going to see an improvement with the rushing attack. So Chase Brown is less impacted, but still impacted. He's going to take like 1 or 2 knocks down my rest of season rankings, but nothing too drastic. Okay. So obviously 1 quarterback injured, that is Joe Burrow. We have another quarterback injury as well. Before we jump into that, do me a massive favor, go ahead and smash that like button. I appreciate y'all for being here with us. Hit the like button, subscribe if you like the content. I got a like goal today of 250 likes. With your help, I think we can get there. Let's talk about Justin Fields. So Justin Fields, unfortunately, did have to come off the field in today's game, and it looks like from all reports and even the video that we'll show you here in a second, it looks like it's a concussion. So you can see the video here. You can see he lands on his head pretty hard and loses consciousness for a little bit. You kind of see the hands start to, kind of curl up a little bit, which we never want to see. But it is going to be a concussion. He did not come back into the game. So my expectations would be personally that he's probably not going to be available in week number 2. It does happen sometimes. Like sometimes we do see, quarterbacks who go down with a concussion. They come back the next week and they're fine. They're good to go. But it's very rare. Most players are missing at least 1 week, especially in the modern day concussion protocol. So clearly, if you were starting Justin Fields, this is going to impact you, right? You're going to have to find someone off the waiver wire. There'll be plenty of options. Check out our video that comes out tomorrow about the waiver wire because we'll have plenty of quarterback pickups for you. But not only does this hurt Justin Fields, impacts the guy that in week 1 scored over 30 fantasy points for you. He was an absolute superstar, looked great. But this offense, even before Fields went out of the game, was already looking a little bit lackadaisical, okay? He only completed 3 out of 11 attempts. So in week 1, we saw the highs of Justin Fields in fantasy football and how great it can be. And in week 2, even before the injury, we saw the lows of just the inconsistent passing, drives being stalled, and then Garrett Wilson, unfortunately, is going to be impacted from that as well. So you can see here, in week number 2, still had 8 targets. That's great. We want to see him up there. 8, 9, 10 targets here with the Jets. Low passing volume offense. However, only catches 4 of them for 50 yards. Doesn't get into the end zone. So he finishes with 9 fantasy points. Now, the backup here is Tyrod Taylor. It could be worse, honestly. In my opinion, losing Joe Burrow is a way bigger impact on Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, that offense, than losing Justin Fields is for Garrett Wilson. Clearly, it will hurt. They have obvious chemistry, but I would say this is more of like a 3 out of 10 panic. So next week, instead of him being like a top 15 to 20 wide receiver in my rankings, he's more of a top 24, top 26, somewhere in that range. They do play Tampa Bay, so it should be a scenario in which the Jets are going to have to score because they're facing a really good offense. So things could be much worse in New York, but certainly not ideal. Okay, so Justin Fields, Joe Burrow suffer injuries. Someone who didn't get injured but didn't have a great game, that is Derrick Henry. Man, talk about the highs and lows of fantasy football. In week 1, everyone who drafted Derrick Henry, victory lapping as they should have. Almost 30 fantasy points, almost 170 rushing yards, almost 10 yards per carry, 2 touchdowns in week number 1. Then he comes out in week number 2. The Cleveland Browns were chirping a little bit, talking about how they know how to stop Derrick Henry. Here's what's weird. The Ravens just absolutely dominated. Through the air, Lamar Jackson was an absolute wizard. I mean, throwing touchdowns left and right. He was absolutely fantastic. And typically in games where the Ravens are up, Derrick Henry is such a smash. This was really strange. This was really, really weird. If you have Derrick Henry, you probably agree with me. But again, only 11 attempts. 11 attempts in a game that they were up and they had, control of it pretty much from halftime onwards. That was a little bit shocking, but Derrick Henry also was not effective against this run. Only 23 yards on 11 attempts, 2.1 yards per carry. He did fumble again. This is back-to-back weeks where he's had a fumble. That is something that is not concerning for a veteran that's, got such, respect within the league. I don't think he's going to lose his job. He's so important to this offense, but it's definitely something to be a little bit concerned about, something to monitor. But Derrick Henry has never, with the Ravens, been a guy that's played over 70% of the snaps. So it's not, abnormal to see Justice Hill get worked into this rotation, but it was a little bit frustrating if we're going to be honest. I mean, you look at the snap counts here, 22 snaps for Justice Hill, 34 for Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry carries the ball 11 times, 12 total opportunities, while Justice Hill right there at 6. So definitely a frustrating day. It's never good when you see Justice Hill outscore Derrick Henry, but this is just one of those things where, hey, our panic level is a 0 out of 10. You do not panic on a Derrick Henry. Keep putting him into your lineups. He's going to have big blow-up games, but of course, with every player in fantasy football, there's always going to be certain scenarios in which you're disappointed. That's just the reality of fantasy football. Again, I appreciate y'all for being here with me. Do me a favor, smash that like button to show some love. Subscribe if you like the content. By the way, at the very end of this video, I'm going to raffle off what we call our 2025 Team Playbook. Team Playbook is a customized game plan for your fantasy football season. I would love to give this away to one of you guys watching. All you need to do is like the video and make sure that you're subscribed. And then later on tomorrow's stream, I'm going to give this away to one of you guys. So I appreciate y'all watching the video. Okay, let's keep going here and let's talk about Travion Henderson. Now, I got to be 100% honest, 100% transparent with you guys. I came out here before week 2 and told you guys, hey, I think Trayvon Henderson's a buy. I really see this team, starting to use him more and more and more. And unfortunately, that's not what we saw here in week number 2. In fact, things went the opposite direction of what I was hoping they were going to go. Before the game, the reports were, hey, we're probably going to see Henderson get more work. And then it was versus the Miami Dolphins defense. Everything was lining up for Henderson to come out there and absolutely smash for fantasy football. But unfortunately, the Patriots did not have the same idea in mind that us in fantasy football had in mind, because you can see here usage for running backs with the Patriots here in week 2. Ramondre Stevenson, 66% of the snaps, 11 carries, 12 routes, 5 targets, 142 yards. Just RB1 dominant usage in every aspect, right? Trayvon was not the dominant guy. Henderson had just 29% of the snaps, so somehow he shows so much explosiveness, so much excitement, right, for this offense, and then his snap percentage goes down from week 1 to week 2. It makes no sense to me, but this is how they're going to roll it out. And, we see Henderson with only 3 carries, 2 targets, 40 total yards. He looked great in the air. But then not only is Ramondre the dominant back still, but Antonio Gibson is still involved. What are we doing, New England? For the love of God, please. We do not need to feature Antonio Gibson anymore. 18% of the snaps, 5 targets, 5 carries, 1 target, 28 total yards. So the reality is, first off, I apologize if you bought him. I still believe he's a league winner long term, but Henderson is not a startable name until we see this change, until we see Antonio Gibson, kind of fade into thin air. Now, the good news is it's very rare that you ever see an NFL team feature 3 running backs over the course of a season. So you do need to be patient with Trayvon Henderson. We just thought that workload was going to come sooner. Clearly, that's not the case. It might take a little bit longer for Henderson really to get his shine, to get his opportunities. So he is a strong hold. Panic level 3 out of 10. We're not going to freak out, but it's certainly not what you wanted to see from Trayvon Henderson here in week number 2. You wanted to see an ascension in usage, not a descension, right? So in week number 1, like we've talked about this before, he comes out there 35% of the snaps, over 11 fantasy points in PPR leagues, 6 targets, 6 catches. So you're seeing a decrease, not an increase, and that is not what we want to see. All right, let's talk about Breece Hall. Another guy in week number 1. If you drafted Breece Hall, you're probably like, I'm smart. I'm the smartest guy in my league. Everybody else is an idiot. I drafted Breece Hall. And of course, we just know that fantasy football every week, it's a different monster. Here in week number 2, Breece Hall does massively disappoint. It was looking like a really good matchup, but the offense as a whole just did not function well. The offense as a whole, it was just, all over the place. We could not see any sustained drives. And unfortunately, like we said earlier, with the Justin Fields concussion, that did not help. But Breece Hall coming out here, 13 total touches. You have to keep in mind, obviously, they were down this entire game. So for him to get 13 total touches in a game that they were dominated, they were down the entire time, that is an encouraging sign. Obviously, we just saw last week where he had, 23 total opportunities through the air as well as on the ground. They play Tampa Bay next week. There will probably be no Justin Fields. So I imagine they will be more focused on establishing the run game. But versus the Tampa Bay Bucs offense, I'm just not sure they're going to be able to do that. So I would not be shocked if we get back-to-back weeks of a down week for Breece Hall. But you should not panic on him, right? I'm not going to come out here and tell you, oh no, well, because Breece Hall was quote unquote bad in week 2, you need to, panic sell him. No, you can definitely explore the market. You can see what options are available out there, but this is not a scenario where you panic sell Breece Hall. Think about it, guys. When everybody knows that there's a player that we're panicking on, nobody, wants to trade for them. So again, I appreciate y'all for being here with me. Let's talk about Tyrone Tracy. All right. I've got a lot of misses this year. I've got a lot of hits. That's just the reality of fantasy football. One of our hits so far is don't draft Tyrone Tracy, okay? We were very much team Cam Scatterboo before the year. We loved him coming out of Arizona State through the draft this year. I know everybody on our Dynasty channel was clowning on us saying, wow, you're really going to trust a fullback? Saying Cam Scatterboo was a fullback. When in reality, I thought Scatterboo was already the better pass catcher, pass protector, and I thought that Tyrone Tracy could really lose his job earlier than people were anticipating. Again, that was just my opinion. But if you look here in week number 2, okay, and we look at the split in this backfield, it does not look good for Tyrone Tracy. So shout out to Jacob Gibbs, who gave us this information on Twitter. The New York Giants week 2 backfield split in the second half plus overtime. Cam Scatterboo with 56% of the snaps. Tyrone Tracy relegated to just 34%. You look in week 1, people who had Tyrone Tracy were saying, well, look, it wasn't a good game, but at least he had 15 touches. At least he had 74% of the snaps. That's a good sign of things moving forward. No, unfortunately, even in week 1, Cam Scatterboo already had a role on the goal line, and that role is just continually growing here in week number 2. So unfortunately, Scatterboo 6 rushing attempts to just 1. And then if you look at the second half, in the second NFL game, Scatterboo, even in the red zone, 75% snap rate. He had 5 of the 5 running back rush attempts in the red zone. So again, where is the value for a Tyrone Tracy at this point? Honestly, like, be for real with me right now, guys. If you drafted him, be so for real. We see Scatterboo with 14 total touches here, just 10 for Tyrone Tracy, and it's only the second week. Be for real right now. Where is the value? Where is the upside for a Tyrone Tracy? All right. If he's not going to be the workhorse 70+% of the snaps guy, if he's not going to be in a good offense, if he's not going to get goal line work, then at what point does Tyrone Tracy become a name that you're excited about? That you can see over the course of the next couple weeks that he massively improves his value. I don't know where you're seeing it. You can let me know. But to me, Tyrone Tracy, panic level, 9 out of 10. I'm seriously panicking about Tyrone Tracy if I own him, because right now he doesn't even look like the RB1 in his own team, and it's only been 2 weeks, and it's a rookie that's his value's probably gonna continue to grow over the course of the year in a Cam Scatterboo. So again, I'm sorry, like I said, not a victory lap. I guess maybe it is, but like I'm saying, we've been wrong on plenty of things. We've been right on plenty of things. That's the nature of fantasy football. Of course, I can't write Tyrone Tracy off completely at this point, but man, it looks absolutely disgusting. And when I say disgusting, I mean disgusting. It does not look good for him in New York. All right, let's move on from Tyrone Tracy to Kaleb Johnson. This is now back-to-back weeks where we have featured Kaleb Johnson on the Panic video, and I don't have any more positive news for you guys, unfortunately. In week number 1, we saw 1 carry for Kaleb Johnson. In week number 2, we saw 1 carry for Kaleb Johnson. And to make matters even worse, Kaleb Johnson was on the kickoff return team, and he didn't realize that, the other team can score a touchdown if you leave the ball in the end zone. So unfortunately, the Seahawks got a free touchdown because Kaleb Johnson made a rookie error. He's a rookie. You should expect that kind of thing. But that does not put him in the eyes of his coaching staff and in the good graces, if you will. That does not make them want to give him more opportunities. Here in week number 2, 2 snaps. The same amount of snaps he got in week number 1. Here in week 2, 1 carry. The same amount of carries that he got in week 1. Meanwhile, we're seeing Jaylen Warren and Kenneth Gainwell completely dominate this backfield. Jaylen Warren with 18 total touches. He was absolutely dominant in fantasy football this week. 17.4 PPR points. A lot of that coming through the air. Again, 4 targets, 4 catches, 86 yards. Last week, we saw most of his fantasy points come through the air as well. So if you own a Kaleb Johnson, I would love to tell you, be patient. Things are going to get better. But we were a 10 out of 10 panic last week. I'm a 10 out of 10 panic again here in week number 2 after week number 2. In fact, call me crazy. Comment down below if you think I'm insane. But I think you can probably drop Kaleb Johnson. If you have difficult decisions with the waiver wire this week, I don't want to drop him, but you probably should. Like, if there's not a clear option, you can drop Kaleb Johnson at this point. Now, be aware, his role probably will grow over the course of time, but at what point does a drastic change happen? I don't see it happening anytime soon, so there's enough concern for me personally to go ahead and say, all right, it's probably time to move on. All right, let's talk about Brian Thomas. Man, what a frustrating game that must have been to watch if you're a Brian Thomas owner. Such a high amount of points scored in this game. Jags, Bengals, even though Joe Burrow goes down with the injury, there's just touchdown after touchdown after touchdown. And unfortunately, Brian Thomas doesn't really get involved in the party. Now, he was involved from a target perspective. He had 12 targets on this team, which is great. He led the way. That's what you want to see. You want to see him with the vast majority of the targets. Here in week number 2, Travis Hunter only comes out there and gets 6 targets. So only 6 targets for Travis Hunter, 12 for Brian Thomas. So he doubles up his target share. That is great. That's what we want to see. But there is not chemistry yet with Brian Thomas and Trevor Lawrence. There is not a mind meld that he and Mac Jones had last year. Now, I'm going to continue to say, put Brian Thomas into your lineup with Liam Cohen, with Trevor Lawrence. That chemistry is going to grow over the course of the year, and he's going to have some big games. So my panic level, I would say 3.8 out of 10, because the volume is still there. I mean, through 2 weeks, we're talking about a guy that is averaging almost 10 targets per game. That's beautiful. That's exactly what you want to see. They will click. There will be touchdowns that come in the future. We just might have to be a little bit more patient. And obviously, if we redid a fantasy draft today, Brian Thomas would not be a first-round pick. He would not be an early second-round pick. So again, we're not going to panic too much, but we are going to start to deploy a lot of patience, all right? We are going to start to ask the question, should you start Brian Thomas or the wide receiver on your bench? Should you start Brian Thomas or the running back in your flex instead? So those are questions we're going to have to start to ask, but it's not time to push the panic button just yet. Okay, so we talked about Brian Thomas. I want to talk about one more player here. And again, leave a comment down below. Tell me what player you're panicked the most about right now through 2 weeks. But let's talk about Mark Andrews. I'm so sorry if you drafted Mark Andrews. I did not draft any of him in my fantasy football leagues, so no shares, no cares. But I do feel bad for the people who spent a 6th, 7th, 8th round pick on Mark Andrews. And what was sold to you was, well, Isaiah Likely is going to be out to start the year, so Andrews is going to be the guy, right? He's going to be that dude. In week number 2, 1 catch. 1.4 fantasy points this week. And it wasn't any better in week number 1. 1 target in week number 1, 1 catch. 3 targets in week number 2, 1 catch. He has yet to score over 2 fantasy points. And ladies and gentlemen, Isaiah Likely is going to be back on this team very soon. They did not put him on the IR, meaning he should be back in week 3 or 4. So if you own Mark Andrews, I'm sorry. I do think this is a true 8, 9 out of 10 from a panic meter perspective. Now you have DeAndre Hopkins that you have to deal with. He's a real threat in the red zone, in the end zone. He has back-to-back weeks with the touchdown, almost had 2 touchdowns in this game. Lamar is completely fine to spread the ball out to a bunch of different players. We had Tylan Wallace score a touchdown in this week. So I'm sorry if you own Mark Andrews, but the unfortunate reality is that it is a strong 9, 10 out of 10 panic for a Mark Andrews, because I can't tell you to start him next week. We weren't telling anyone to start him this week. At what point does it get better? It probably doesn't get better when there's more target share, competition in a name like Isaiah Likely. So this is probably a true 10 out of 10 panic. But guys, I appreciate you so much. Do me a massive favor, smash that like button on today's video. I've got a like goal of 250 likes. With your help, I think we can get there. Let me know down below again who you're panicking on. Let me know what your record is. And the last thing I'm going to say here in today's video is, if you need help with your fantasy football team, the 2025 season pass is still available. It's a $34 one-time purchase. You get some vouchers to come on our live stream and ask me questions. You get access to my rest of season rankings, my weekly rankings. It's about $2 per week for the rest of the season. As soon as I update my rankings and I hit submit, you'll know exactly my rankings every week, rest of season, in-season weekly rankings. You'll have access to it. You can check that out in the pinned comment. But guys, I appreciate you so much. I hope you're going to get the win here week number 2. If not, don't give up. Even my 0-2 teams out there, guys, do not give up, okay? There is so much more football left to be played. Think about how different week 1 was to week 2. The same is going to happen in week number 3. I appreciate you watching. Subscribe and drop a like if you like the content, and I'll see you next week. Nothing but love.